Let's face it, business technology is frustrating and complex. So how do you make sure it works for your team? To make IT right, start the discussion at go-domain.com. You're listening to Discussions by Domain, a podcast for business leaders. Our discussions may be with people you've probably heard of before, but the majority of our guests are in the trenches, professionals like you and I, with the same challenges and struggles of keeping up in the Northeast. They're implementing strategies, overcoming hurdles. They're leading the fastest growing businesses in our region. My name is Anthony DeGraw, Director of Partnerships at Domain Computer Services, and the host of this show. When I'm not talking with business leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of Domain and the ups and downs of our own growth journey, as we intend to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show. So welcome to another episode of Discussions by Domain. I am your host, Anthony DeGraw, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming Tom Murdoch. He is a manager over at EisnerAmper in their Manhattan-based office. He's going to join us today and talk about managing expectations and communicating throughout an audit. Tom and I got to get together last week, actually. It was a really good event held by Edison Partners, who's a client of his. And we were able to talk about auditing and business transactions. And he wanted to jump on here and kind of talk about that. And I think he's a great person to do it. So Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Anthony, for having me. I appreciate it. And Edison, yes, that is one of my favorite clients. So if they're listening, you guys are the best.
Great group over there.
Yeah.
So, Tom, before we jump into this topic of communicating and managing expectations and audits, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself so people can get to know you and your background, and also talk to us a little bit about what you guys are up to at EisnerAmper nowadays.
Sure. I'm a senior manager in the audit practice here at EisnerAmper. We're a public accounting firm that has both a national and global presence. I specialize in audits in the financial services sector. Mainly, I focus on hedge funds and private equity funds. You know, what are we up to now? The business is obviously growing. We are expanding, again, both nationally and globally. I'd say at this point, I've been here 8 years, and, it's pretty cyclical in the accounting world. So at this point, we are preparing for year-end audits in terms of busy season, which is, anywhere from January through April, for me, sometimes through June. So we're getting ready, doing some interim work, reaching out to our clients, and, getting going through the first half of the year or first 3 quarters.
Awesome. So this is perfect timing as you gear up for year-end audits here. Diving into the topic a little bit, why are financial audits necessary?
Yeah, so there's a few reasons. One, regulatory agencies such as the SEC or the CFTC may require it. There may be a contractual obligation with their investors or the bank, that's stipulated in the terms of those respective agreements where they need audited financials. Maybe it isn't required necessarily, but it's an industry best practice. Or let's say the owner of the business believes that the cost of having a third party give assurance on their numbers and it's a valuable service, maybe they will go ahead and, do that for many reasons, whether it's to get investors or to get a loan from the bank, just make sure everything's looking okay.
Awesome. So what types of communication is needed in an audit, and how do you make the most of it?
Sure. So first of all, it needs to be a two-way street. It's not a one-way communication from the client to you or you to the client. The lines of communication need to flow and be open in both directions, or you're setting yourself up for failure. Secondly, being in the client service industry, I recommend finding out how your client wants to be communicated with, whether that be by phone, by email, in-person meetings, hopefully a combination of all three. It makes them feel that you care and you want to understand how they operate best. And, don't forget to communicate with your clients how you like to be communicated with, and the best way for you to be contacted so that your client's not reaching out to you via email when you typically don't check your emails, which I hope you don't, which I hope you do check your emails, but, maybe you like phone better. So, make sure, again, two-way street, you find out how they want to be communicated with, and you also communicate to them how you like to be reached.
Yeah, Tom,
Go
too,
ahead.
quick question on that, just to go into it a little bit more. I could understand, like, from your perspective, you're in this world, you're doing these audits all the time, you have a lot of clients in this space. So when you're potentially communicating with clients, it's just coming like off the hip, very natural to you. On the client's end, they may not understand all the language that you potentially are using. Right, in the IT industry, we have a ton of acronyms, and sometimes we have to
Yeah.
be very careful how we're communicating to clients. How do you guys handle that over at Eisner?
That's a really good point. And I say, speaking for Eisner, as a whole, we're pretty good at explaining to clients. We really focus on our client service. So if I use an acronym, let's say I say GAP, and you're like, what is GAP? And, I explain to you what that is. I'm not just going to go with the acronym and, run with it. So I think it is something where, just like you may not fully understand the client's business or everything they say, they may not fully understand everything you say. So I give kind of an example how I teach trainings. It's, teach someone or speak to someone like they don't know how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, where you
Yeah.
think that's easy, 2 slices of bread, peanut butter, jelly, but, pretend like they're asking, okay, they don't know what bread is. They don't know what jelly is. They don't know what peanut butter is. They don't even know what a sandwich is. So, try and put yourself on that playing field when explaining, especially, a complex area.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense, and it's something we deal with too. But I can imagine, just from not being in your industry, that there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of standard documents and stuff that you need, and that may be a tough part of communicating properly.
Yeah, and to get right to what we're talking about, communication, just, put yourself in their shoes and, something that you may know, they may not. So make sure you're clear, concise, and, you explain it fully. And then another point, just before I guess maybe we move on, communication with the entire team is pretty important. You want the client to know who the points of contact are, at your firm, and you want to find out who they are at the client. This way, if you can't get somebody and there's a pressing matter, you could reach out to the other person. Or you don't want to inundate someone with emails and requests when they're not that person to contact. You want to make sure you free up everyone's schedule and everyone's work with in the proper capacity for whatever that is at the client as well as internally. There's nothing worse than finding out you're emailing somebody and they're not responding back, and you're like, well, they're just not getting to it. And then you find out that they're the wrong person to email. So make sure you know who to contact at the client, and make sure the client knows who to contact, at your organization as well. And then, all these steps that we spoke about in communication, whether it's finding out how they like to be communicated with or explanations, you set yourself up for success as opposed to failure. I mean, it should be something that you think is simple when you see here communication, but a lot of people don't think about it. And if you don't think about it, you could be setting yourself up, like I said, for failure.
Yeah, no, it's that very important. Like you said, within these organizations, some people may be responsible for certain pieces of what you need, and others for other information that you need. And if you don't understand that and you don't know where in the organization this stuff is, you could be delaying the process or making this harder than it needs to be.
Yeah, and as simple as, they're a person. You don't want to frustrate someone because you could have asked the question, initially. So, you don't want to sour a relationship. You don't want to, send something off a cliff when it could be as simple as, finding out a little bit about them.
Gotcha. All right, let's move on to setting expectations and managing expectations. So, how do you, as the firm and the client, manage and set expectations to go back and forth with each other?
Sure. I think, when you get down to it, you always want to find out what that drop dead date is, what the client or the regulatory agency states that, these financials and the opinion that we give need to be due by. Once you could find that end date, typically it's best you work backwards. And as you work backwards, you want to set some, interim, what I like to call, let's say, interim deadlines, where you say, okay, certain tasks need to be completed by these dates in order for us to meet the drop dead date. So you start with the end, and then you create some, interim dates or interim goals in between, so you make sure you're progressing towards that end timeline. I would say that's probably the best way to do it. You can't lose track of that drop dead date, but you also need to do things in the interim to progress towards it.
Gotcha. One of the issues that we deal with is holding the clients accountable for their end of the bargain, right? At the end of the
Yeah.
day, you guys can't do your job if you don't have the information that you need from them. And we run into the same issues. Do you have any tips or tricks on that process, or just thoughts in general on how to keep clients accountable for their part of the deadlines, or their part of the their part of the arrangement agreement?
Yeah, and I think, in some of the, some clients are difficult, some clients are easy. But in talking about accountability, even though you're providing the client service and they're paying you, you also don't want to let a client off the hook and you just jump every time, they call. You're also running your business just like they are. So as long as you have that understanding and they understand that, hey, if you miss a certain target deadline where you give us your 9:30 financial statements, you miss it by 2 weeks. There are things we can do to remediate the situation and still meet our targeted deadline, but you have to know that what happens on our end, just like many service organizations, is you may lose out on staffing. You may not have the people ready to just jump onto that engagement. So in terms of what you're asking, any tips and tricks, I think it's just having that understanding with the client. We all know things come up, but you have to put them in your shoes and you have to let them know what happens if you kind of miss those kind of interim targets that you kind of both agreed upon.
Yeah. Another question I wanted to ask you about this too, because like deadlines are important, gathering information
Yeah.
is what we found a little bit of success with here is kind of setting people up for what's to come. And I'm assuming with like your deadlines, like your drop dead date, and then working back from those dates too, are you kind of helping explain to them, this is the documentation we need by these dates, and this is what this process is going to look like overall? And giving them more of a comfort level with this entire process?
Yes, that's a really good point. And again, it goes back to understanding, both sides, both the client and both the audit side. We explain to them what we need, and we explain to them, kind of what we do on a day-to-day basis. And, what they call a request list. We kind of detail out every single thing we need initially from a more high level. Let's say, hey, give me or provide me with your, 1231 financial package, your notes to the financial statements, and the support schedules, right?
Mm-hmm.
As well as some administrative documents we definitely need. And then what we do is we go to the granular level as we start to test, your accounts. Basically, we have an expectation within that request list where we say, hey, guys, this is what we need. If you can provide this to us in a reasonable time, we'll be able to provide you with the opinion on your financial statements. So yes, they are set up in a way where they know what, we're asking of them and what they need to provide to us in order for us to do our job.
Gotcha. I wanted to also ask you about, you mentioned regulators, right? SEC regulations and whatnot, and why these certain times companies may do these audits. So the regulations are making a big play into the IT audit. Now IT audits are becoming a really big thing. These different regulations like New York DFS, HIPAA, high tech, NIST, ISO, all these different things. How would you recommend an organization that's coming under audit due to these regulations? Are there things to look out for there? Are there things the regulators are looking for? Obviously, specifically to the accounting industry right now, but I'm actually asking this for our own knowledge here as
Sure.
well.
Sure. I would say, without going specifically into any type or regulation or regulating body, I think the number one thing to do is get ahead of it. If you know they're coming down the pipeline, let's say ASC 606, it's a revenue standard that was for private companies implemented the beginning of 2019, and for public companies was 2018. That was something that it was a way that, companies had to record their revenue different or disclose it in a different way. And, it had been out for a while that it was changing, and the people who didn't get ahead of it were scrambling, at year end or the beginning of the year when they actually had to do it. So the best way to, the best way to do it is get ahead of it.
Okay.
Talk to people in the industry, read white papers, speak to trusted advisors on how they're, accounting for things, or how they're dealing with the regulations in general. A lot of times it's, not so much for me, but for clients and maybe for you, it's an admin, headache. You got to figure out your processes and controls. Are they up to the standards? Are they, is what's in place already for what the upcoming regulations say needs to be there. So you never want to get caught with your, pants down per se.
Yeah, no, definitely. And reaching out to like a firm like yours that has done this before, obviously, or handled some of these regulations and has the experience in it, when they reach out proactively to you, I'm sure you guys are in a much better position to help handle that for them instead of it being an emergency drill.
Yeah, like I said, getting ahead of it. If my client reaches out to me, I may have said, okay, I got to reach out to my clients, but things happen. So maybe I'm a little bit delayed in the process. If they are proactive and they reach out to me, it makes me not forget about them. Now, I don't want to make it seem like I forget about my clients, but in your everyday, you say you want to reach out to them this week, and then all of a sudden, before you know it, it's a month later and you haven't done it so far. I think the onus is on both the service provider as well as the client to be knowledgeable about the upcoming regulations, be proactive, and get ahead of the curve before, you have to do something. Because then when you have to do something, you scramble, you don't do it properly, and you may not get the appropriate guidance or have enough time to do it before you have to meet that, regulatory deadline.
Yeah, gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for giving us some insight into that, because that's definitely coming down the pipe pretty hard on the IT side. Final question here on the topic. What other items should organizations be aware of when it comes to audit? And I have a couple bullet points here I wanted to ask you about. So we'll start with the first bullet point is high versus low priority items.
Okay. So, you always want to disaggregate all items. You want to, figure out what you need to focus on first. Let's say the high priority items versus the low. For an audit of a financial statement, the highest priority item, I would say, would be the financial statements and the related footnote disclosures. The quicker you can get that to your auditors, along with the supporting schedules, the faster they can begin and do their job, get you second and third requests, because we all know that's what happens. So financial statements and the related support, I would say, is the highest priority. Now, if we're not talking about support, there's items in an audit that need responses and items where we rely on someone that's not at the audit firm or at the client. And one example of that is audit confirmations. And they can be legal confirmations, cash confirmations, broker, line of credit, investor confirmations. There's a ton of confirmations that they need to be prepared by the auditor, us, sent to the client for signature, and then we have to send those out to a third party. And the last thing you want to do is rely on someone, again, not at the client, not at the audit firm, to respond to you prior to getting the audit financials out. And depending on what area of the audit that confirmation relates to, it could hold up the process and the opinion. And nobody wants to miss a deadline because a third party did not respond. So if I had one piece of advice, get the audit confirmations out as soon as possible so you don't have to wait for them and scramble at the end.
Got it. Thank you for that. Next bullet point I had is being able to adapt and pivot in the audit process. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think it's like anything in life, but especially with speaking to an audit is you have to be able to adapt. You don't even know what's going to happen day to day, never mind, creating a timeline that's 3 months out. Something could happen at the client. There could be, God forbid, a death. There could be an issue where a flood ruined their whole office and, their documents are gone. And those are graver situations, but just the fact of thinking that they're going to get it to you by the first week and then they don't get it to you by the second week, the financial statement. So you have to be able to adapt. You have to know and, kind of get ahead of these unforeseen circumstances and build them into your timeline where you can say, hey, if they get it to us a little bit late, we're going to add this staff and we're going to work some later hours. Because, the last thing you want to do is tell your client, oh, you didn't meet our deadline on that day. You're not getting your financials or your audit opinion. Sorry, guys. But I'm pretty sure they will no longer be a client,
Yeah.
So, being able to pivot, being able to adapt, understanding their situation and understanding that you can be there instead of, scolding them, being somewhere in the position to help them, I think also goes a long way for that relationship status.
No, that's great. In terms of getting ahead of the audit, and we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but how can a client get ahead of this audit? How can they be prepared for engaging in the audit process?
Whether it's the client or you, if you're the client and you need an audit and have never gotten one before, do it early. Don't wait till the end of the year to find an audit firm, because then you may find an audit firm that just doesn't, meet your expectations, or that, is cost too much, or you just don't get along. So do that as early as possible. Now, if you've had an audit before, which, I'll speak to, you want to meet with the client and the audit firm. I would say, a quarterly basis is great. You want to find out, what's happened every quarter. Were there major revenue transactions, or did the organizational structure change, or have there been any influx of investor capital or major distributions? As an auditor, if I know that information, I'm better able to plan my audit more efficiently and effectively. If I know you had a structure change, I might need to get my tax team involved. So you don't want to find out about that, a month before the deadline.
Yeah.
So, I think that having those quarterly meetings at minimum, or when you get closer to the end of the year, FaceTime. I love FaceTime, sitting there. I feel like they open up more to you when you're in person. Go have a drink, go grab dinner, find out what their pain points are. Maybe you can help them out. Let your client know that you're a point of reference as well, because then they'll reach out to you as a so-called trusted advisor, as opposed to an annuity service that they only need you for 2 months out of the year to get your audited financial statements out. So in a way, it works best where the client sees you as that trusted advisor, reaches out, they'll keep you in the know. And then by the time you get to the end and close to the deadline, there won't be any surprises, which you'll be able to file your financials on time, and both parties will be happy, which is definitely the key.
No, that's really good. If you don't mind, can you speak to that? We have a similar process called a QBR process, quarterly business review. Can you speak to that a little bit? What's that ideal look like? Because I think when these are done right and well, they don't take that long. It keeps everybody updated and on the same page. And like you said, at the end of the year or throughout the course of the year, things just move a lot more smoothly.
Sure. I have a really good client who's very proactive. And I'll give you a few things that happen. I'd say once a quarter, we go up to Connecticut and have a lunch or a dinner. So we get that FaceTime at least 4 times a year, typically 5. Once the audit's done, we also go up there and have a little celebration, which is nice for everybody, for their team, for my team. Everybody gets to know each other. So a quarterly in-person meeting we have. Every quarter, they send us their financial package. So if we wanted to, we can look in and see what's going on. That leads to open dialogues. We keep each other on top of mind, where let's say my head was down for 3 months, boom, an email comes through from my client and I say, oh, haven't spoken to him in a while, and I reach out. Or he hasn't seen me and he's going to send these over, and he reaches out. So, the quarterly FaceTime, the open dialogue on whenever something comes up, they see us as a trusted advisor. So they call us as almost, if they don't know the answer, we discuss it before they go any further. Typically, I'd say that's what it looks like. It's very healthy. You also don't see them as, hey, I only call them when I need something. You want this to be a partnership, and in a true partnership, it has to come from both ends, and you need to both equally care about each other. And specifically, if you're talking accounting or auditing, you care about their financials, you care about their timeline and when they need to get things done, and they care about getting the information to you in order for you to do your job.
Awesome. Good stuff. No, I thank you for lining that out and what that looks like with your best client there. Because I think that can flow for many businesses, not just what we're speaking about here.
Agreed.
All right. Enough with auditing. We're good on that. Let's talk about Mr. Murdoch himself, who's a blast, by the way. If anybody's in Manhattan, I highly recommend getting in contact with him, which we will definitely link to your contact information in the show notes here.
Great.
But in terms of some more personal information, Tom, you have an interesting story. I did hear it once. I don't think this was your chosen path, maybe early on. But if you were to go back to your younger self, say you're 23, 24, what information, what type of recommendations or advice would you give yourself?
Sure. I would give myself a lot of advice and recommendations. And I guess the story I was telling you is I always wanted to be a stockbroker, and I thought I'd make a lot of money on Wall Street. And as I was in college, that didn't seem like a viable option anymore. The business seemed to dissipate. And I said, what am I going to do? And I got into accounting, and, I wasn't the best student, but that's neither here nor there. I am, I made it, Mom.
Yeah.
But I think overall, it would be, ask questions. If you don't ask the question, the other person or persons is not going to assume what you want or need. that goes for getting any type of answer or asking for a raise or needing help on the job training. Do not be afraid to speak up. Things are not better off left unsaid. So speak up, be proactive, ask questions. Nobody really looks at you when you ask a question like you're crazy. So, ask the question. And if they do, who cares? Forget them.
Yeah, love it. Love it. What type of, I have this question that I ask about books because I'm actively usually reading 2 or 3 because I
Sure.
can't stay focused long enough to get through the whole one at one point in time. But I've also expanded this to other media. Obviously, this is a podcast, and I
Yeah.
listen to a ton of podcasts as well because I drive a significant amount of miles, and that's what I do. But what
That's good.
type of what type of books specifically, or maybe even media? It could be a podcast, it could be a documentary, whatever you're thinking top of mind that you recommend people should check out.
Sure. Oh man. When you think about media and documentaries and books, there's just so many. And podcasts, I'm actually just starting to get into. I know they're all over the place, and I'm a better reader than I am listening to podcasts. When I'm listening, I'm not focusing on something, so I'm all over the place. So,
Okay.
other than yours, I wouldn't say there's a podcast I recommend per se.
Awesome.
Yeah, and there's too many.
I didn't pay him to say that.
I could attest to that. And then, there's just so much TV that nothing strikes me. But there are a couple books that I've read over the last couple of years that really stick with me. One was Weapons of Math Destruction by Cathy O'Neill. The book's about how mathematical models such as algorithms affect outcomes in all walks of life, from policing to the hedge fund industry to college application process. It really changes the way you kind of look at life and things that you may have not known big data and algorithms were a part of, that they are there. And not only do they make them these processes efficient and effective, but how harmful some of these algorithms and data can be to certain people. So that was a really cool book. And then the other one, the author, Russel, Brand's a little controversial. It's called Revolution. I really like him. I like how his mind works. And the book, in short, is based on principles and things being done for the common good and how people should act and think about that. It's kind of eye-opening for me. Funny, also serious, quick read. At least I read it pretty quick. And as long as you don't mind British humor and cussing, I think I highly recommend it.
Awesome. That's a good one. And he's an interesting character.
He is.
So that would be good. What nonprofit or charity do you personally support that you'd like to give recognition to publicly, or that EisnerAmper supports also?
Sure. So personally, I don't have a particular charity that I support. What I do is, if I have friends who are going through things and, whether it's a child, a family member, or just, something they're passionate about, I'll try and support that. At EisnerAmper, we have this thing called EA Cares, and it's a community volunteer organization open to all employees of EisnerAmper, and our mission is to basically serve those in need of using our gifts of time and skills. And for example, we work with the American Cancer Society, Animal Haven, Toys for Tots, Ronald McDonald, the United Way, and then also, a lot of other national, international, and local charities that could, pull the list up, but that would take too long. So, work a lot, through our organization at the firm, EisnerAmper Cares.
Awesome. Good stuff. And we'll make sure we link to we'll link to the EA Cares portion of the website there so people can check that out as well.
That would be amazing.
A final question. This is my favorite question because I'm always trying to uncover people like yourself, right? Like I don't even, other than us getting connected through, we mentioned it already, but through Edison Partners and that link up happening and you inviting me to an event and us coming out. And now this has been a 3-year journey now. Who's a thought leader, an everyday practitioner here in the Northeast, the local area, that we should give some recognition to, that people should look out into, even potentially get them on the podcast here to, pick their brain on their topic of expertise?
Sure. And, I can't say there's one, whether it's a mentee, a role model, someone in the public, it's really hard to choose. But I guess do look to my firm, and if I can plug them here,
Sure.
if you went to EisnerAmper.com and you looked at the industries, or the service lines, you'll find numerous articles, podcasts, blogs on thought leadership and the people at EisnerAmper who are those respective thought leaders. And, being a public accounting firm, we have numerous industries, numerous service lines. I mean, anything a typical public accounting firm does, we do. So, without getting into, specifics, you can go to our website, look at all the thought leaders, industries in your specified field if you are of interest. And, I kind of say that, we're the one-stop shop, typical to a public accounting firm. And if you can't find what you're looking for, reach out to me and I can put you in touch with the person who can, because there's always somebody here who can help in some capacity.
Awesome. Cool. I appreciate that. And we'll make sure we do that. And on that note, I recently, you started getting into, you focus primarily on auditing, but over our last couple conversations, you started to talk to me about a little business transaction work you've been helping out the firm with and getting involved in and starting to learn about. And I would love to, I see your eyes light up when you start to talk about it, especially in person. So why don't you touch on that a little bit so we can make sure people understand what you're doing in that area as well?
Sure. So we have a group here. It's the Transaction Advisory Service Group. And in short, it's, when there's a deal happening, we may come on or hired to do a quality of earnings. And that's simply where you're looking at a prospect or a target company's earnings outlook, EBITDA, revenue, and you're kind of, getting into the granular detail and giving a report. You're not giving assurance on it. You're just looking through and saying what you believe it to be and putting some color on it behind a report. But the reason my eyes lit up is because it has always interested me. And, being in audit, you have a lot of clients and it's tough to find time. And I finally pushed the guy to get me to let me help him out. And I did, and I think it went well. And it's really a good way to understand your client's business from their point of view, who their customers are, what drives revenue, everything from the back office, how they produce financial statements. It was a really good experience for me. It's our transaction advisory group. Hopefully I can do a lot more work with them, but it kind of bridges the gap, especially being in private equity and auditing these funds that invest in, private portfolio companies, whereas the transaction advisory group is doing a lot of that quality of earnings work, transactional work for those portfolio companies. And those portfolio companies is who, I worked on, and, it kind of bridges that gap as to, what the investors or the general partners making those portfolio company investments look for, and some of the work that they do, to get comfortable and decide to make an investment or not.
Outstanding.
Thank you for asking about that.
No problem. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is Mr. Tom Murdoch, Senior Manager over at EisnerAmper in their New York office there. He's an awesome time. I know we already have a topic lined up for number 2. So
yes.
We'll be shooting that in the future. We may be doing it in person. Tom dresses very well, so I want to make sure we get that on camera. And so thank you very much again, Tom, for coming on. I truly appreciate it.
No, Anthony, I appreciate the time, and I look forward to our next one.
Awesome. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. This guarantees that every episode will get delivered directly to your device. To help us get the word out, share with a friend, leave a review, and check out our discussions on the web at go-domain.com/podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.